You know, there's a quiet revolution happening right under our noses. In the wake of a public health crisis that completely reshaped modern medicine, the $60 billion pain management industry is being remade from the ground up. Today, we're digging into this seismic shift away from opioids, a shift that's being driven by an incredible convergence of new science, really aggressive market strategies, and, believe it or not, one single game-changing piece of legislation.
So the fallout from the opioid crisis left this huge void, right? And the entire industry, from doctors to drug makers, was asking one massive question: what comes next? But this wasn't just a clinical question. It was a massive commercial vacuum. The crisis created this urgent, system-wide demand for safer, non-addictive alternatives, and in doing so, it unlocked one of the biggest market opportunities in medicine today.
So what really unlocked this $60 billion opportunity? I mean, scientific innovation was already happening in the background, but it was one single piece of legislation that truly acted as the catalyst, opening the floodgates for this brand new market.
And that catalyst was the NOPAIN Act. Okay, so think about how it used to work. Before 2025, hospitals had a major financial incentive to use cheaper, generic opioids. Why? Because the more expensive alternatives were all just bundled into one single payment for a surgery. The NOPAIN Act totally changed that. It mandated that Medicare would now reimburse for non-opioid treatment separately, which took all that financial pressure off the hospitals. And here's the crucial point. This act pretty much single-handedly made these innovative therapies commercially viable on a massive scale.
Okay, so with the market primed and the payment pathway cleared, a whole new set of contenders has emerged. But these companies aren't just a random list of drug makers. You can actually understand them through three very distinct strategic approaches they're taking to capture this new frontier in pain management.
Let's break down these archetypes. First, you've got the delivery innovators. They're focused on making existing drugs better. Then there are the mechanism game changers. These are the folks inventing entirely new ways to stop pain. And finally, you have the multi-platform strategists who use really clever financial and operational models to just outmaneuver everybody else.
Vertex is the perfect example of a game changer. Their drug, Journavx, doesn't work on the brain like an opioid does. Instead, it targets a very specific protein called NaV1.8, which acts like a pain signal switch. And the key is, this protein is only found in nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. So think of it like shutting off the pain signal right at the source, long before it ever reaches the brain. It's just a brilliant path to powerful pain relief without that terrible risk of addiction.
And wow, did the market respond. The reaction was immediate and, frankly, overwhelming. In its very first year, Journavx sought over 500,000 prescriptions. Now, this wasn't just a successful launch, it was a crystal-clear signal of the massive pent-up demand for a truly new, non-addictive pain medication.
Now, in contrast to Vertex, let's look at Pacira, a classic delivery innovator. As you can see from their pipeline here, their entire strategy is built around their depot foam technology. It's this special formulation that basically wraps up a drug and releases it slowly over time. They don't invent new molecules. Instead, they take proven, effective anesthetics like bupivacaine and use their proprietary platform to give you long-lasting pain control from just a single shot. All right, let's move to our third archetype, the multi-platform strategist. And this is Axsome. Honestly, this chart tells you almost everything you need to know about their approach. In 2025, nearly 90 cents of every single dollar they made went directly back into sales and marketing. That is an incredibly aggressive, high-leverage strategy designed for one thing and one thing only: rapid market domination. So the question is, how on earth can a company sustain that level of spending? Well, they do it by being just ruthlessly efficient everywhere else. First, they use direct-to-consumer ads to create patient demand that literally pulls prescriptions through the system. Second, they avoid the huge cost of building global sales teams by just partnering with companies abroad. And third, they use this really clever regulatory pathway called 505(b)(2). You could think of it as a kind of shortcut for drug approval. It lets them use existing data for a known drug, which dramatically lowers their R&D risk, and of course, their cost.
So we have these very different strategies, right? Novel science, delivery innovation, and pure marketing leverage. But how do they actually stack up on paper? Let's turn to the 2025 financial data to benchmark their performance and see what the numbers say.
Before we dive into the full table, this one comparison just perfectly frames the efficiency gap in this industry. On one end of the spectrum, you have Vertex, a financial powerhouse, generating almost $1.9 million per employee. And on the other end, a company like Hengrui, which uses a much more labor-intensive, boots-on-the-ground sales model
and that results in about $210,000 per employee. A massive difference.
Now for the core data. This table really tells the story of each company's strategy. Pacira is the established leader, with the highest pain product revenue by a long shot. Axsome, as we saw, is the aggressive newcomer, pouring almost 90% of its revenue back into sales and marketing to grab that market share. And then you have Vertex, the R&D powerhouse, with a pretty lean sales expense but a massive 32% of its revenue fueling its innovation engine. This is basically the financial DNA of each strategy laid bare.
This quote from our own research team really captures the key takeaway from that data perfectly. Vertex's immense profitability from its other drugs gives it what we call financial redundancy. Basically, it can afford to enter the pain market and spend whatever it takes to win without really having to worry about short-term profits. That makes it an incredibly dangerous competitor.
Of course, no market is without its risks. So to really have a complete picture, we need to take a look at the specific headwinds and the financial pressures that are facing these companies.
And there are two really distinct types of risk to understand here. For a company like Pacira, the biggest threat on the horizon is the patent cliff. That's the future date when its key drug loses protection and gets hit with generic competition. For a company like Hengrui, though, there's a more subtle risk, and it's hidden in its accounting. Instead of treating their R&D costs as an expense for the year, they treat them as an investment that'll pay off later. Now, this makes their current profits look better, but it's a huge gamble. If those R&D projects fail, they'll have to take a massive write-down in the future.
All right, so let's put all these pieces together. The policy change, the competing strategies, the financial realities, and the risks. What does the long game actually look like for the future of pain relief? The most important point is this: the market has permanently shifted. Non-opioid treatments are no longer just an add-on or some kind of niche option. They are now becoming the mainstream standard of care. This is a structural replacement for an older, more dangerous therapy, and frankly, there's no going back. So what's the bottom line? In this high-stakes game for the future of pain relief, who's really going to come out on top? Will it be the innovators with the absolute best science, the giants with the deepest pockets, or maybe the savviest strategists who can master the complex game of delivery, marketing, and reimbursement? Well, that is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?